Hi, I'm Sabrina Dellin, CEO of the Samara Centre for Democracy. Thanks for joining us for this special webinar with our friends at Apathy is Boring. Today, we're diving into political conversations and how they're unfolding during the federal election online and what that means for you as a voter. Social media is full of election content, but it's not always easy to tell what's real, accurate, or trustworthy. That's why we're here to help you feel informed and confident as you head to the polls. You'll hear from my colleagues at the Samara Centre, Beatrice Wayne and Alex McIsaac, about our new project Verified, which is tracking the digital election conversation from misinformation to fake accounts and foreign interference. We're also going to hear from our friend Sam Rouge at Apathy is Boring, who'll share her research on astroturfing and foreign interference. Then we'll wrap up by answering your questions. But before we begin, I just wanted to share some great election resources which Elections Canada has put together and that are designed to help you with everything from knowing where to vote, accessibility, who the candidates are in your riding, how to vote early, by mail, or on campus, as well as what Elections Canada is doing to ensure electoral integrity and security. You can find all of that at electionscanada.ca. Let's get started. Over to you, Alex and Beatrice.
Thanks, Sabrina. I'm excited to give a little bit of background on our Verified project. The purpose of this project is to monitor the online federal election conversation, to help Canadians really understand how politics is playing out across digital spaces and what information threats like disinformation, foreign interference, and different forms of inauthentic engagement look like, where they show up, and how they may be shaping our politics. One part of this project that I want to emphasize up front is that the difficulties of navigating Canadian politics online is not a problem of misinformed Canadians. In and across different platforms, the voters are dealing with information manipulation from bad actors, which is leading to the spread of misinformation amongst the public. With Verified, we hope to support and equip Canadian voters to understand how political conversation and election information is showing up across different platforms, how and where Canadians may be vulnerable to information threats, as well as places where we see some positive civic engagement happening online. Over the course of the election, we've been monitoring Reddit, YouTube, and Blue Sky and sharing weekly reports. Our first few reports have focused on Reddit. This is for a few reasons. First, it is a highly used platform. Over 20% of Canadians have a Reddit account, and many Canadians who don't have an account still spend significant time on Reddit, viewing subreddits and reading discussions. It has also become, since Meta began blocking news content for Canadians on their platforms, the premier platform for linking to, sharing, and discussing print news. It also has a different approach to content moderation, distinct from the other highly used platforms such as Meta platforms and X. We will be continuing to monitor Reddit as well as YouTube and Blue Sky as the election continues. So this has been just a little bit of background on the project, but I'll now hand things over to our Senior Research Coordinator, Alex McIsaac, to discuss some of the key takeaways from our Verified project so far.
Thanks, Beatrice, and hi, everybody. So with our Verified project so far, we've published 2 reports, with a third coming out today, monitoring activity on r/Canada, which is the largest Canadian-focused subreddit. This is a subreddit that has over 3.8 million members, and it's the 213th largest subreddit in the world, with more subscribers than r/Taylor Swift or r/Marvel. The subreddit is also highly promoted to new Canadian Reddit users when they sign up with a new Reddit account. And so all of this is to say that this subreddit in particular, r/Canada, is by far the largest and most influential national Canadian-focused subreddit. And so in investigating this space, here's what our research has found. First, a very small number of users on r/Canada are having an outsized influence on discussion. And so we found the 150 most active commenters. Those 150 users made up just 14% of all comments. And just 9 users accounted for 28% of post submissions on the subreddit. And this is something that we found in our past research looking into Twitter. We found very similar concentrations of very few users having this outsized influence. And we think this is really vital for people to recognize for a few reasons. Firstly, This underscores that what we see on these social media platforms isn't necessarily reflective of the views and opinions of the general public. We think that if Canadian social media users were more conscious of how small amounts of users are able to command discussions and command influence in online communities like this so significantly, um, it could help defend against the manipulative actors who seek to intentionally negatively influence our politics by kind of helping inoculate people against misunderstanding what their impression of public opinion may be. And that's the other consideration with this finding is that large platforms or communities that have these conditions are more susceptible to information threats like disinformation, inauthentic engagement, and astroturfing, foreign influence operations, and other manipulative practices that seek to influence public opinion and widely cause deliberate harm. We're not saying that this is a reality in r/Canada today necessarily, and we've not identified any deliberately harmful information manipulation at this time, but our findings recognize that this community and communities like it that have a lower diversity of users posting, that they'd be more easily and impactfully targeted by manipulation operations, and that this kind of manipulation could be happening already. So in terms of what users were talking about on the platform, we found that a key topic of conversation on r/Canada during this election has been Canada-US relations. We found that during the first days of the election, 38% of all submissions referenced our neighbors to the south. And submissions about them far outweighed conversations about other foreign countries, like, for example, China or India, as well as outweighed discussions on topics like domestic issues, like housing, for instance. And then our newest report shows that online conversation on r/Canada is dominated by legacy mainstream media outlets. We found there's a particular reliance on CBC News and Post media outlets on r/Canada. And we also found that links to one of these 6 outlets, those being the CBC, the National Post, Toronto Star, CTV News, Globe and Mail, and Global News, made up 61% of all posts on r/Canada. And we found that this means there's limited space in this community for independent publications and local outlets. And we fear that this lack of news outlet diversity is a weakness and is another barrier for independent journalism or smaller news outlets in Canada that are already facing so many barriers at the present. But we also found that the Beaverton is popular. The Beaverton being the satirical comedic news site satirizing Canadian news. And so r/Canada is primarily just news and informative content in terms of their submissions. But the Beaverton was really the only source that we saw that kind of broke that mold drastically. And so the Beaverton was featured in just 13 of the 900 posts in our data set. But this outlet received basically the same amount of upvotes across those 13 submissions that outlets like the Globe and Mail did in their 107 submissions to r/Canada. And the Beaverton received the 4th highest total amount of upvotes of any outlet in our data set. And so we see that there's clearly some significant appetite for discussing Canadian news and politics in different and non-traditional ways out of this finding, as these Beaverton posts were able to generate tons of engagement so consistently. So thanks for letting me share some of those findings. I'll pass it back to you, Beatrice.
Thanks very much for that overview, Alex. To close out, I'd just like to add that this project is ongoing and we'll be continuing to monitor the health of online political conversation on Reddit, but also YouTube and Blue Sky throughout the election and following it. So please check out our verified project on our website, samaracentre.ca, and sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss any of our reports. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce our colleague, Sam Roosh from Apathy is Boring, an organization that's also doing really innovative and important work on how political conversations are unfolding online. Sam, we're so glad to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work you're doing this election, sharing this reporting. I think it's such an important mirror that we hold up to ourselves during an election like this. Okay, so as Beatrice mentioned, I'm with an organization in Canada called Apathy is Boring. Apathy is Boring was founded in 2004, and for over 20 years, we've been leading nonpartisan work dedicated to supporting and educating youth to be active and contributing members in Canada's democracy. We believe that democracy is the best system we have to protect human rights, fundamental freedoms, and to ensure that the people are heard, and that includes, importantly, young people. We're really active during elections, getting the youth vote out, and between elections in our year-round programming where we work with youth to improve all aspects of our democracy. The Better Democracy campaign was launched this year and is ASB's latest campaign to engage young Canadians as leaders in a movement that uplifts and recenters the public interest in Canadian politics. Young people are one of the least represented groups in our federal politics, and that's why we think we're the best people to lead the movement to modernize and democratize our institutions. So as you can see here, 97% of Canadians are looking for a system that encourages the parties to work together in the public interest. So we've devised what we call our Better Democracy Roadmap, and that is a path to update Canada's democracy, to rebuild the public trust and better respond to the growing challenges that we're facing in the 21st century. We're charting a new way forward and coming back to first principles, which is in Canada, the people govern. And democracy isn't easy. Taking the thoughts, goals, and priorities of millions of people and transforming them into actionable policy is, quite frankly, a miracle. We think of democratic institutions as the operating system that underpins all the hard decisions we make. And that system is, to put it very gently, a little outdated. That said, the opportunity is there to make Canada a global leader in a time of democratic backsliding. Actually, Jason Stanley, recent US emigre and fascism scholar who's recently joined the faculty at the University of Toronto, has called Canada one of the global front lines alongside Ukraine in the struggle for democracy worldwide. So what is our Better Democracy Roadmap? We have 4 key areas of focus. The first one is voting in elections. So that's about the front lines of our democracy. Better voting and election processes, we believe, will lead to a better responding government. Political finance, the lifeblood of our democratic process. As my colleague Terry is very fond of saying, money makes the world go round. So political financing in the public interest is essential to ensure that everyone's vote counts. Transparency, integrity in our politics, trust in our politics has to be reestablished. And by creating transparency and protecting integrity, something we're going to talk a little bit about in a moment, we can make this whole system make sense. And then finally, building a culture of democracy is essential towards protecting it. So we want to celebrate democracy beyond the ballot box and celebrate it as a public good. So today we're going to talk about one policy in particular that's really linked with the work that Samara is doing with the Verified project, and that's policy relating to protecting our authentic discourse and ensuring that Canadians know who is speaking to them and why. On November 1st, 2024, the Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perrault, as you can see by the quote here, released a report with some recommendations, including some changes to protect Canada's elections from foreign interference. Currently, foreign actors, so everyone knows, can influence Canadians up until the day an election is called, which gives them a huge window, basically from the day after the previous election to the day the writ drops to the next one, a huge window of opportunity to influence public opinion. So what do we want to do? We want to actually ban foreign astroturfing. It's not about what is said, very importantly, content neutral, but it's about how hidden resources, mostly financial resources or tech resources, human resources, are used to mislead, divide, and push agendas without Canadians even knowing. As Alex and Beatrice already mentioned, we know how the potential for such small groups of people online to really control and shape the discourse. So it's really essential that deceptive campaigns that manipulate and distort public opinion that undermines Canada's democracy are banned. Astroturfing is harmful to our democratic discourse because it exploits our trust through that deception. So when actors, non-state, foreign state actors, bad actors in general, who lack credibility or popular support, want to get the word out, the easiest way for them to do that is to conceal their true identity so that they can amplify their perspective. And then this in turn influences people who come across those spaces online in the wild, as we say, and it can make those ideas seem more popular or normal than they might be otherwise. This bypasses the democratic process altogether, and also in the process subverts the public interest in favor of really narrow agendas. And we know that it is always the case that when someone is concealing their identities, they're doing so for malign reasons. Otherwise, they would take credit for their perspective. So what does this mean in practice, and what did the Chief Electoral Officer recommend? The changes that he recommended would strengthen the Canada Elections Act effectively. So it would apply the existing rules against foreign interference at all times and not just during elections. As you can see on the screen, there's some language in there that specifically says during an election period, which refers to that period from the writ drop to election day. So that section would be removed. And it would also cover efforts to influence votes for or against candidates in leadership or nomination races, which are also very important to our democracy. We really support this recommendation. I think it's a really essential step, but there remain a few loopholes for a lot of the reasons that Alex outlined before. When you look at how these campaigns actually function online, you notice there's a very big exception at the bottom of this clause. And basically, if you look through this list, you could basically apply this to any type of online communication where outside of traditional news outlets, every publisher is more or less publishing some form of commentary, editorial opinion, or sharing news pieces. We believe that this exception should be removed to allow the Commissioner of Elections Canada and the law itself to conclude what undue influence is from that first section, and what it means in a modern world that includes our online one. We believe that these changes would allow for Canadians to protect our information ecosystem and be able to investigate and enforce the protection of our authentic discourse and an authentic Canadian discourse. It's also really important to mention again that this is importantly content neutral. It is about the undue influence of certain actors through the deception of the Canadian public and is agnostic to what that content might be. We already regulate advertising third parties and other domestic information with respect to our election. And this is a really big glaring hole that must be protected in a modern democracy to make sure that we continue to be able to have, again, authentic Canadian discourse. So if you'd like to learn more, that's just one of 10 policies that we're working on at the moment. So you're welcome to follow us. You can find us almost anywhere at Apathy is Boring. And if you'd like to get more involved with the Better Democracy campaign, you can visit our website, learn more, take a look through our resources, but also sign up if you'd like to be a supporter or get involved as a volunteer organizer. And with that, I will pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, Alex, and Beatrice for sharing those insights with us. Earlier this week, we turned to you, Canadian voters, to see if you had any questions about navigating political conversations online. And here's what you had to say. So I've got a couple questions here for the group. The first one comes from Sarah in Richmond Hill, who wants to know, for the young people who engage in politics online, what political information are they not learning? What gaps are there in their civic awareness?
So I think we exist in this ecosystem now where almost an infinite amount of information is accessible. So sometimes it's about just knowing where to go to find the correct information. But I also think that one of the things that I think is just missing in general from our civic literacy, civic education programs is not just how systems are structured, but how as citizens we can engage with them. So we know how elections work. We know how or that information is available. We can learn, especially from trusted sources like Elections Canada, where, when, how we can cast a ballot. We can find information on the party platforms. But I think it's important between elections that we know that there are spaces that we can engage in, ways we can engage that go beyond the online world. And I think sometimes that can be really challenging to find.
I agree with Sam. I think that connection between finding your online and offline communities and places to where you know that you can plug in locally and feel like you're making a democratic difference, that's not always straightforward online. And that's one of the reasons why in our Verified project, we're looking for places where positive civic online conversation is happening so we can support that and find ways to help make that connection between online and offline activism. I'd also say that I think we're all exist in sort of a low information literacy environment right now where it's really hard to know how to verify information. And one of the goals of our Verified project is to provide some straightforward information literacy around just news sharing. So going online, if you're on a particular platform, do you know what news is available and what news is allowed on that platform? So just knowing that if you see something that looks like a CBC link on Facebook, that's a scam. That right now meta platforms are not allowing links to news sources, but you can see fake news sources online. Knowing if you're on Reddit, on a particular subreddit, what sort of news are you likely to see on that subreddit? What sort of news is being kept off that subreddit for because of the particular inclinations of a moderator? So I think providing that sort of information about what kind of news you can find online and how to go outside of that platform to verify your sources, how to approach them. I think those sources exist through Apathy is Boring, through Samara, and through other wonderful organizations like Media Smarts. And we're trying to raise awareness about that because I don't think right now there's enough being done just to in civic education to provide that information for young people.
Okay, great. The next question is from Geethan in Toronto, who is asking, as Canada navigates a tumultuous trade relationship with the United States, how might we expect foreign interference in our political discourse to change?
I could jump in on that one. So, um, something that we're particularly seeing, especially with this new administration in the United States, is a lot of social media platforms changing how they operate. And so, something to be conscious of as Canadians is that, we all know that we do a lot of political discourse happens online, but that political discourse is happening on privately owned platforms owned by American companies, mostly for the most part. And so we've seen over the past couple of years, and especially this year, a handful of the largest platforms changing some of their moderation practices, some of their trust and safety goals and requirements to kind of roll back investments into those departments within their companies and also just changing what kind of content is or isn't allowed on their platform in ways that I think could be very easily argued to be anti-democratic and anti-Canadian against Canadian values. And so we've seen this first with how Twitter has turned into X, which is owned by a member of the Trump administration now. And we've now seen early this year meta platforms, that being Facebook and Instagram, directly follow suit and follow in the footsteps of X. And we're even seeing YouTube now following as well in terms of, reducing protections around conversations around gender or gender identity on their platforms, like those other spaces that I mentioned before. So I think that that's a big threat of foreign interference that we don't really think of. We usually think of who's posting, but it's also kind of the structural layer of the platforms themselves, at least in a Canadian context.
I could just add that we're seeing already in this election American-made discourses and misinformation, which is now, because of the rollback of trust and safety that Alex has mentioned, appearing on platforms. So very specifically, We've seen misinformation around the use of Dominion voting machines, which in the Canadian federal election, which is just straight disinformation, because as everyone can see on the wonderful Elections Canada Electofax resource, that in the Elections Canada hand counts ballots. We do not use voting machines in our federal elections, and they are witnessed by witnesses from representatives of candidates. So we have a very safe and secure voting system, but you still see disinformation showing up on these US-owned social media platforms that are spreading specific disinformation about our elections. And I think we really need to be wary and aware of that, because this is a clear reaction to a new status quo in the administration of our southern neighbors.
I agree with both Alex and Beatrice, and I actually add that I think that part of this sort of Team Canada moment that we're in, I think there's discussions that are starting around what tech sovereignty looks like for Canada, and thinking through a lot of the policy that I think was started in the previous government, but different parties sort of taking different perspectives on what that looks like and what that might mean for Canadians, understanding better the addictive designs of some of these platforms. And I think about that from sort of an opportunity cost perspective of like, to what we were saying before, like time spent online is not time spent with people in real life for the most part. So I think there's lots of different layers that you can get into with this stuff. But I think to Alex's point, it's very important to remember that these platforms are owned by people who are participating and supporting this current government in the United States. And that's creating, I think, some challenges for Canada.
Okay, our last question is from Jason in Vancouver, who wants to know, how do I, as an individual, help encourage and incentivize good civic discourse?
We actually have a program at Apathy is Boring called Table Topics that is sort of focused on this idea. And we're running it during this current election, but also have it sort of year round. And the idea is to bring young people together to sort of break the taboo of no politics at the dinner table. So we often encourage people to do it around a meal. But one of the things that we talk about really is like, what is the approach that you're taking when you're coming into a conversation? And I think that we have a tendency to take sort of adversarial positions when we're talking about politics, and really approach it sort of like online discourse, actually, in a very like, I am right and I am convincing you, almost like a debate setting. But one of the most interesting ways, and I find it way more enjoyable and generative, is to actually like come into a conversation listening to learn and understand, and asking questions and trying to build shared ideas and common ground with the folks that you're talking to. And this is something that we can practice in any political conversation. That doesn't mean that we're going to come to agreement, or but we might come to mutual understanding. And I think that that's sort of a bar that we can set around better understanding where each of us is coming from, the values that we share, and where we might diverge, and then being able to apply that, maybe even eventually to develop a strategy to combat, the thing that you've heard. But listening to understand is a really great first step, and certainly not just listening to argue.
I feel that so strongly, Sam. And I think that I would just underline that and say the extent to which we can approach our politics with a sense of curiosity rather than a sense of combativeness. We know from research that Canadians are worried about polarization and they want to see less of it. Samara Centre research of former MPs who've left office, talk again and again about how they love committee work because they get to work across parties and really listen and learn in that moment. And they're not playing politics in that moment. They're not performing a sense of party antagonism because they feel like they have to. They actually have an opportunity to listen and learn then. And I think we should take that lesson and know that our politicians want that. We want that. We need to stop approaching politics as a zero-sum game and look for win-win solutions. And I think approaching it exactly as Sam described, listening to learn and with the spirit of curiosity and empathy is the way forward.
Before we wrap up, don't forget to follow the Samara Centre for Democracy and Apathy is Boring on social media. We're both on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can also find the Samara Centre on Blue Sky. And don't forget to visit samaracentre.ca to learn more about the Verified project and sign up to receive our nonpartisan analysis. And remember, you can always find elections information at electionscanada.ca. Thanks for tuning in.